Hey, this is just a quick note about our sponsor, Privado, the premier enterprise privacy platform purpose-built to bridge the gap between privacy and engineering. Its privacy code scanning solution embeds privacy, compliance, and governance into the product development lifecycle and empowers privacy and security teams with unparalleled visibility of sensitive data flows and the insights to find and fix privacy vulnerabilities. You can leverage Privado's data flows, dynamic data mapping, privacy assessment automation, and real-time visibility of privacy issues. Enter the era of proactive privacy and transform privacy from business blocker to business enabler. To learn more, go to privado.ai.
Our mission is really about helping to address that, dedicated to helping people reimagine and create technology that enables collective human flourishing. And we're passionate. We've fallen in love with this problem, this ethical intent to action gap that pervades the tech industry, and we're dedicated to figuring out how to solve it.
Hello, I am Deborah J. Farber. Welcome to the Shifting Privacy Left podcast, where we talk about embedding privacy by design and default into the engineering function to prevent privacy harms to humans and to prevent dystopia. Each week, we'll bring you unique discussions with global privacy technologists and innovators working at the bleeding edge of privacy research and emerging technologies, standards, business models, and ecosystems. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my next two guests, Matthew Alja and Alja Isakovic, co-founders at Tethix, a company that builds products that enable you to embed ethics into the fabric of your organization and that help you embody your ethos, ETHOS, which we'll talk about later today. Matt lives in Sydney, Australia, and describes himself as a moral imagineer, system thinker, tinkerer, and doer. And drawing from various disciplines and a diverse career, he helps people reimagine and design organizations, products, and services and business models that support human well-being and planetary flourishing. With Tethix, he says, you can plant seeds of good intentions and grow products you can be proud of. Alja lives in Ljubljana, Slovenia, and her work at Tethix aligns with her passion, imagining a more inclusive future in which tech innovation supports learning and community building, helps us take better care of each other and our planet, and brings joy and playfulness into our lives. She's also a founding contributor to the ResponsibleTech.work framework, which is also a URL address, which proposes practical tools for more responsible product development in the tech industry based on core guiding principles. Today, we're going to be talking about a really interesting concept called Responsible Firekeeping. Welcome, Matt and Alja. I'm really, really excited to talk to you about this today.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So there's a lot of big words and utopian, and I don't say that in a negative way, but utopian goals that you're aiming to bring ethical tech to the world that I hear in your marketing there. What prompted you to found Tethix? And what's your core mission?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do have a leaning towards being optimistic, if not purely for our own mental health, I think. And what prompted us really is seeing many of the problems out there in tech and really just building on the decade or more of really seeing the implications of a lack of care and respect for what technology can do, a negative impact of technology and technology development on people and the planet. And, our mission is really about helping to address that, dedicated to helping people reimagine and create technology that enables collective human flourishing. And we're passionate. We've fallen in love with this problem, this ethical intent to action gap that pervades the tech industry, and we're dedicated to figuring out how to solve it.
Yeah, so you mentioned this gap. Can you unpack that for us? What is the problem statement here that you are focused on solving for?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, but we'll try and narrow in on it. And I guess I'll kind of talk a little bit about examples. And I think the intent to action gap in general is essentially what we do in our behavior does not necessarily always match our intentions. And there's this gap between what we might say or stand for and what we actually do in our work. And I'll make reference to a study that was done through MIT and a company called Culture X back in 2020. And it was a research looking at corporate value statements of Fortune 500 companies. And they looked at all these statements and then surveyed the employees. And essentially they found, the questions around that for the employees were around, does the behavior of your company, does the culture of your company reflect these value statements that get made? And they found no statistical correlation between the behaviors and the value statements. And this is probably no surprise for many people. You can understand people within cross-functional product teams that might be building technology, as an example, are always under immense pressure. There's lots of constraints. There's pressure to move fast and break things. And an example of this, privacy is in cookie notices and privacy policies. And we take your privacy seriously. Pat Walsh, the lovely Pat Walsh, who many of the listeners are probably familiar with, put that comma in there. We take your privacy seriously. as a little bit of
point at the end, I'm sure.
Yeah, this stab at this. And, I think the ethics washing, there's the trust washing aspects of this where there's no genuine intent, but a lot of organizations, a lot of people want to actually reflect the values, the things that they say they care about, that they want to stand for, that they'll fight to defend. But there's a lot of systemic challenges as well. We've got extractive, destructive and linear socioeconomic systems and shareholder primacy and, and a disconnect from our nature and our natural world. So, our approach at Tethix is looking to solve for that, for companies, individuals, organizations, practitioners that have that intention, that really want to live and breathe what they want to stand for, particularly in this ethical sense, where we're working to support them and also trying to account for some of these systemic challenges as well.
Thank you for that. And so to address this gap, I know that Tethix has created an ethical framework that you call elemental ethics, which I think the audience is going to find fascinating. Tethix, their stated goal with elemental ethics is to move companies from a state of agile firefighting to responsible firekeeping. And so tell us a little bit about that. What is elemental ethics, and how does elemental ethics help product development teams embark on what you call the deliberate for the good path?
That's a great question, Deborah. Because of what Matt was just saying about the intent to action gap being a symptom of so many systemic problems, we really think a different approach is needed. So we don't really see elemental ethics as a typical framework, but more a new way of learning, doing, thinking, relating, and working. We really think that we need a new language, new narratives to deliberately choose better future paths, because as we all know, many of the products that we're building are not, in fact, making the world a better place, as tech startups often like to promise. So with elemental ethics, we emphasize 4 core skills or elements, as we call them, that we need to balance to make essentially better product decisions in everyday practice. Now, most tech companies are focused on technology and practice, which is the fire element, right? With technology, we're starting all these new fires. But in order to maintain a healthy fire, you actually need to get to know and work with other elements. And this means improving the airflow. And what we mean by that is communication and collaboration within an organization, grounding yourself in earth by doing research and exploration of diverse perspectives outside the organization. Take the time to pause and reflect on what you're doing, which represents the water that you can use to extinguish the fires you accidentally start through your technology and practice. You might have noticed that a lot of the language we use draws inspiration from nature, because we really want to also emphasize the ecological challenges we are facing today. And we really think that ethics is not just about being nice to each other, but elevating the most important conversations we really need to have as a species to ensure our future survival on this planet. And given the impact that tech has in our lives, and like Matt was saying, all the material resources it's extracting and relying on, we really have a responsibility as technologists to think of non-human stakeholders and the broad systemic impacts of the tech we're building. We really hope that elemental ethics can contribute to this narrative shift we need in product development.
It's fascinating. And I mean, obviously that sounds like something like who wouldn't want to sign up for that, right? So let's get into a little more depth with the concept of responsible firekeeping now that you've articulated the underpinning of the elemental ethics. If we already have agile development processes, why do companies need to consider an additional approach for ethics? How is agile insufficient?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't want to introduce too much of the new, and this is part of the challenge, which we might dive into as we explore this. But as Alja was just kind of saying, Agile is this fire-focused practice. It's concerned with delivering business value. So the way that we practice Agile traditionally, and there's obviously lots of variation in organizations and different organizational contexts, but we're treating software development as this factory line, leaving no room for pause and approaches for these deeper ethical discussions, moral deliberation, and exercising of moral imagination, because we get obsessed, be that incentivized as well because of KPIs and the way that we design metrics within organizations. We're obsessed with, sprinting and shipping and velocity and that, is different from what I believe and what we believe we actually need. And I think many probably agree with this, but if you vehemently agree, that's excellent as well, because we enjoy diversity of perspectives on this. So, on like the data protection side, and privacy side, we might see this as mindless data collection, collecting because you can, not because you should, no purpose specification, why you're actually collecting it in the first place, if you even actually need to. We see that particularly in digital tech products. It's just so pervasive. By always sprinting, we often end up starting these fires and then get exhausting by this constant bug fixing, data breaches and leaks, and PR problems that come from these downstream issues that we've created as a result of starting the fires. So we call that firefighting. We use these metaphors as a way to kind of make sense of things, and for the most part, language is very metaphorical. But we're not saying throw out all of your existing processes. This is about interfacing and connecting in and embedding with the way that people already work. And what we're saying is that practice, which is generally driven by fire, needs to be balanced with these other elements that Alja was getting at, the collaboration, the research, exploration, pause and reflection. And this is what we do with elemental ethics and what it actually brings attention to.
So define responsible firekeeping for us.
Yeah, at its essence, responsible firekeeping is about, like I said, balancing the fire of technology and practice with these other elements. So instead of wasting time in meetings due to miscommunications and people maybe misinterpreting the acceptance criteria in a user story, giving people time and space to tell stories and learn from each other and explore where the values that they want to stand for actually come to life in the products and services that they build and the features that they actually are working on. So instead of, this ethics washing that tends to take place and a lot of cognitive and moral dissonance that people might face at work, you learn how to embody these principles and values that you say you stand for. Many organizations have them, and there's issues with that I'll just briefly kind of touch on as well. You're building more trust by demonstrating what you are doing is more aligned to what you say you care about and what you value as an organization. And this gap, exists for lots of different reasons. There's just lots of systemic challenges, but, it's generally top down and exclusive. These things are kind of imposed, disconnected from workflows. Business metrics generally win in the end, as I was mentioning before. Yeah. So firefighting versus responsible firekeeping.
And how does responsible firekeeping shift organizations? Basically, what benefits can be realized from this approach? You mentioned trust. I just wanted to give opportunity to see if there's additional benefits as well.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, loyal listeners. The Shifting Privacy Left podcast is seeking sponsors who want to help educate our growing community of privacy engineers. Position your brand in front of privacy engineers, architects, developers, researchers, and privacy tech buyers. Insert a 30 to 60 second ad like this one into every published episode of the podcast. This is dynamic content after all. Feature your new product, an upcoming conference, a sponsored special deal, endless opportunities. Email sponsorship@shiftingprivacyleft.com for more information on our sponsorship package. Okay, let's get back to our engaging privacy conversation.
Yeah, I mean, additional benefits for this, like, the cost that comes downstream from this incessant firefighting. There's cost reduction, no doubt, that comes to this. When you be proactive, you think of privacy by design and privacy engineering. When organizations are actually being proactive about this in the way that they're actually designing and developing engineering products and services, that it might have some upfront cost. There's a shift in approaches, particularly when this stuff is being introduced, but downstream, you're saving a whole bunch of money. You're reducing risk. For large publicly listed companies, you're reducing the risk of a trust breach. There's lots of evidence to show that these breaches of trust that are reflective of how trustworthy you are as an organization, which is a function of you demonstrating that you have integrity and be able to follow through on the value that you promise and the values that you stand for. But that impacts bottom line business metrics that, senior stakeholders, as an example, care about, EBITDA and these bottom line business values. And there's an economic argument for this, let alone something like the productivity impacts that likely come, which we're really interested in doing some research on into next year with some pilot programs on just the dissonance that practitioners, people within organizations face when they know that what they say they're meant to stand for is actually not reflected in what they do.
It just makes me think of the song by Fun. What do you stand for? It just keeps coming in my head the entire conversation so far. So I just needed to get that out.
I love that.
Yeah. What I hear you saying too is that this ethical firekeeping can help transition an agile team from being reactive to being more proactive, which is also one of the principles of privacy by design. So it definitely seems like something that organizations should at least find out more about, the responsible firekeeping in your ethical framework. Let me ask, why should organizations consider choosing elemental ethics over conventional ethics frameworks?
That's a great question. And I think Matt already touched on a lot of the benefits related to trust, risk management, and all of these things. An important difference that I think it's also worth emphasizing is that conventional ethics frameworks tend to be top-down impositions of values and principles that are usually chosen by the founders, sometimes even defined by external consultants. So to use a bit of the language from the Agile Manifesto, which has its place in time, and it was the shift in narrative. The way we compare elemental ethics to conventional ways of doing ethics is that elemental ethics is essentially choosing to tell living stories that grow with the organization over having posters with values that gather dust on walls. It's about awakening your moral imagination and playfulness over using language that's too abstract to be relatable and applicable. Elemental ethics is about being useful in practice at all levels of the organization over impressing stakeholders on a website and being forgotten by everyone else. Elemental ethics is choosing something shaped by practitioners, mindful of tensions and oriented towards action over a framework or process shaped by consultants without firsthand experiences of everyday ethical tensions in the field. So elemental ethics is about embodying and embedding ethics at all levels of the organization as a living process. So it's something that can really grow with the organization to meet the different challenges, as opposed to conventional frameworks that essentially see ethics as a checklist, as a static exercise that you do once, right? So even if you shift it left, you do it once, and then it's forgotten. It becomes a static poster on a wall with a value that nobody really knows how to interpret.
In a Confluence page, rather than on a poster on a wall, just in a Confluence space,
yes, on a Confluence
or
page.
Internal intranet knowledge base that no one actually visits.
Or part of HR training, right?
Yes.
That you do once, or maybe get refreshed once every quarter, but then you have deadlines and budget constraints that make you forget all about the wonderful, good intentions that you have written on the website.
Right. And HR, while, maybe they come up with it and it's well-intentioned, is not expert at embedding values into engineering. So I could understand where
absolutely
there is definitely a big gap. So tell us, you've got this other concept called ethos, which is an acronym, and it stands for the Ethical Tension and Health Operating System. Tell us about ethos.
Yeah, so like we said, we really want to help organizations embody and embed ethics into everyday practice. So it's not just forgotten as a set of values or like a training you do once in a while. And that's why we're building the Ethos suite of apps that integrate with your existing tools. So for instance, we'll have an Ethos app for Slack because that's where most of our conversations now happen. An Ethos app for Jira to support software development, an Ethos app for Figma for designers, Ethos for Zoom, and so on. So we really want to meet everyone where their daily practice happens at different levels in the organizations. And all of this Ethos app connect together to help you keep track of all the ethical tensions and the overall health in your organizations, and to guide you towards nurturing your values and principles with action. So there's nothing wrong with having explicit values and principles, right? The problem is that they're usually forgotten and nobody really understands how to nurture them. So this is where the Ethos apps help you. And we also really want to reduce the friction of shifting not just privacy, but all these different areas of responsibility left by integrating with existing tools and help people learn and develop their elemental ethics skills by doing. So all the Ethos apps are designed to grow with teams within an organization to meet their maturity level, because like we said, ethics is not a static checkbox exercise, right? It's a living process. And at the same time, we also want to make ethics fun, accessible, and something that makes you smile, which, are not usually words that you associate with ethics. So to give you a practical example, what this means in Ethos apps, instead of developing traditional dashboard with charts and metrics, we are developing the Ethos Garden as a living space that your team anyone in the team or organization can visit and see how their practice is nurturing their good intentions. So a space that really reflects your embodiment of the ethics that you do.
That's fascinating. Besides privacy, what are some of the other ethical tensions that are addressed in Ethos and in your overall elemental ethics framework?
This is entirely up to each organization, right? Because each organization is unique, and the problem that a lot of ethics or ethics-related frameworks have is that they try to find one solution to fit them all, right? And we intentionally design all our frameworks and apps to be really modifiable and that they can meet teams where they're at, so that they can integrate with different ways of working, different processes. And this is really important, I think, for any ethics tool to succeed. You really have to adapt to the people who are using it.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. How can a person or an organization become a responsible firekeeper? Can you just walk us through, I guess, a best practices approach?
Yeah. Best practice is probably one of the things that is somewhat of a challenge, but we'll weave this perspective in here. And change happens at different levels of the organization, so it's organizational and it's personal. So it's got to be bottom up, top down, middle in and out. And that's really a crucial element. So if what we were kind of referring to before was that top down and exclusive aspect, like that's why there's part of the problem. Like if you're imposing these values ensure that any of your ethical, your purpose, your values, your principles that you might formally define, that needs to kind of actually reflect like how people feel like across an organization. And in bigger organizations, probably more work that's actually got to be done. And just kind of building on what Alja was saying, like elemental ethics, it implicitly reflects our values, our principles that we have as an organization, particularly ecological orientation. And that's reflected in like the nature metaphors as an example. There's a lot about accounting for, a pluralism of these values. So we do tend to have a fat bell curve of distribution of values. Humans tend to have very common ways of expressing what we actually care about in these moral senses, social justice and, human agency and accountability and openness and transparency and things like that tend to commonly come up. So when those are getting defined, ensuring that these are, the discussions about what it actually means are reflected across the organization and people actually understand what that means, and you would see the same like privacy. What does that mean in context when you're building? What does that mean to the stakeholders, the communities in which you might serve or impact as an organization? There's a lot that can be done on personal level by just going beyond this fire, aiming more for collaboration and diversity within the organization, looking at research and learnings from different diverse fields, really trying to be multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary, and taking time to pause and reflect, dare to ask those questions, those tough questions, becoming an advocate. So those types of practices, and you'll see those, there's the privacy advocates in organizations and, you need to, not everyone's going to be those, but that needs to be reflected as part of the culture, and encouraged. And, this idea of creating the psychological safety for hunch cultures, like when people feel that something isn't right, making sure that place and space is there to actually be able to, people speak up and say, oh, hey, I think this new feature or the way that we've defined it is designed in a way that is taking advantage of people. We say that we value our customers' agency and their autonomy, that we're actually taking it away here. We're working against them, in some onboarding process or something like that, and that's at like a CX at design level, but it might also be just in the way that things are engineered as well or architected. So your listeners might have that experience of being an advocate for shifting privacy left in their organization. So, thinking about it like that, those best practices do start with those conversations, do start sometimes with people being those advocates, and spreading out. We also offer lots of workshops as well, like to support people in this process. So, we're building product, but we're also doing a lot of training, builds on, many years of experience in instructional design, particularly between myself and Alja. I helped start Australia's first entrepreneurial college, and really love helping people learn. Alja's long part of her past decade and more designing courses and curriculum and learning materials. So we offer workshops for teams and organizations that want to develop these elemental skills and learn how to look beyond this allure of the fire and just increase that possibility space so that the things that you want to make most preferable, the things that you want to care about, like become the most possible. So next year, we'll be releasing the first in a suite of ethos apps, which will support these teams and organizations in this transformation process, in this kind of metamorphosis from firefighting to responsible firekeeping, and helping them to translate this intent, this high-level intent that they might have into actionable pledges, commitments, and have those nurtured in their ethos garden. So to get a better idea of this, as well, for the listeners that might work in an organization interested in this, you can read a day in the life of a responsible firekeeper, a wonderful blog that Alja wrote. And, that goes through what does it actually look like in a reasonable amount of detail. So, in a relatable story.
I will put a link to that in our show notes, so that'll be easy for people to find the blog post. So what it sounds like to me is that Ethos, the ethical attention and health operating system, the suite of apps that helps with implementing elemental ethics into your organization, it sounds like any company defines what their values are, and this suite of tools will help in the proactive engagement of communication and feedback loops and ability to speak up. And it kind of facilitates a ongoing dialogue with these values and these ethical tensions presented to the developers so that within their workflow, so that they can kind of surface and address ethical issues. Is that generally what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
that's
a fairly accurate description. Obviously, it's a way easier to understand once we have the apps out and ready to be used. But yeah, essentially, it's up to every team to decide what they want to nurture in their ethos garden and what they want to essentially pay attention to. And this might change over time.
Great. I wanted to just stress that it's not like adopt your ethical view on things. And then it's, elemental ethics is the Tethix's view on how any organization should, their values, but instead it's a process.
Yeah.
That you define your own values and as an org, and your approach is how do you deal with the tensions and how to facilitate that within the engineering workflow.
Yeah, essentially, elemental ethics is the underlying philosophy, and we'll be using a lot of that, just the language and the metaphors in the user interface, for example. But we might have suggested starting seed sets of values or principles to make this process easier for you. But it's always best, the IKEA effect when teams choose their own good intentions that they want to work towards. And it will also depend on just where they are in the organization. For example, if it's a team that's responsible for, let's say, bringing generative AI into their product, they might take something like the European Commission's principles for trustworthy AI and make those the seeds they nurture, right, as they figure out how to integrate AI in their product. Or if it's a team that's tasked with improving the privacy of a product or something like that, they might have privacy as the core value that they nurture in their ethos garden. So yeah, it's absolutely modifiable and adjustable as it should be, because we are not there to impose our value system, but we do provide the underlying philosophy and the metaphors and the language that's used in the apps.
Yeah, it seems like it really helps with the by design approaches, security by design, privacy by design, ethics by design. It'll help you embed it into your agile processes. So I think that's really unique. And I really like the approach. I am curious, how hard do you think this would be or what's the level of effort required to embed this into engineering practices for a small but growing company versus like an enterprise? And I know you probably haven't done this yet, so it's just more, what are you envisioning, I guess, would be some of the tensions, or how hard it would be, or how would you approach it if you were an enterprise versus like a small but fast growing company?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and variance that we're trying to design something that is able to be adaptable and extensible depending on your organizational context. So, like Alja referenced, if you don't have formally defined ethical values in relation to the technology you're building, or, gone down to principles and your kind of guidelines, these guidelines for actions that principles are meant to represent, we're offering this easy way to get started by having these seeds that reflect lots of the different already defined and common language that's used in technology, and that might be adaptions of Salesforce, or like privacy by design, and taking those principles, the 7 principles of privacy by design, and having those what we call the seeds catalog. When you take those, you pick and choose, and you plant them in your ethos garden, and this becomes part. If you're using the Slack app, or it's integrated within Jira, you can get started pretty quickly. That's the whole idea. For larger organizations, they might already have these values defined. So it's about having those populated, being able to have those reflected, in terms of a starting process. And our kind of technology kind of interim CTO, he calls it Tethix runtime. It's how you integrate it with your existing enterprise IT fabric. That whole idea of being able to get up and get started in a large organization, 5,000, 10,000 plus, employees, that's obviously going to take a little bit more time because there's a lot more people and people within the organization that need to adapt and work with this and have them included in the process. So you might pilot something within a specific, product team, for instance. But it's got to, in a larger organization, it's actually you've got to have the authorizing environment to do this to some degree for it to actually translate into that larger scale cultural change. But it can also accommodate, this ground up approach where, there's people within a larger organization that are like, we really love this. They've got the autonomy within their business units or within their part of the business to adopt a tool like this, and integrate it within their task management, their project management type software like Jira or something like Slack as an example.
Just want to add that we essentially have different experience in working with different sized organizations. And as we're developing these Ethos apps, we're also thinking how they might be used from the smaller, scrappy startups that are just getting started to the large organizations. So we're trying to really design something that will grow with the organization no matter what the starting size is, and essentially support ethics as a living process that changes as the organization changes, matures, and encounters different challenges.
It seems like ethics should have its own life cycle the same way we have like the software development life cycle and the data life cycle and the DevOps life cycle. It seems that there should be also a ability to kind of constantly monitor and get feedback for and test and your ethical framework as well. So that makes a lot of sense. Alja, I'd love to turn our attention to talk about the responsibletech.work framework that you've been contributing to. Tell us about why we need a responsible product development framework and what is the goal of the framework?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I basically started Responsible Tech Work because I think we need practical tools that can help tech workers take responsibility for their work, regardless of job title. So what the work I do with Tethix is more focused on supporting organizations and teams. Responsible tech work is about inspiring and empowering tech workers who might not be working in an organization that's fully on board with the whole ethical, responsible thing. So it is a pretty small open source project that anyone can use to learn more about different areas of responsible product development using familiar language. And talking about responsible product development or even responsible AI, it's such a big word that encompasses so many things. And it's really hard for any one person to become an expert in privacy, ethics, sustainability, accessibility, and all these other areas that essentially fall under responsible product development. But I think it's still important to have, for anyone that works in tech, to have a broad awareness of these different topics and questions that you should be asking. So with Responsible Tech Work, we want to introduce all these aspects in a simple way, without using like complicated jargon that's often used in academic research or a lot of the tools that are out there, or even responsible tech reports use a lot of like really complicated language, right? And the focus with the framework or this open source project is essentially to offer practical tools that can help you in your day-to-day work, not just learning about an abstract ideal.
Awesome. What are some of the core elements of the framework and how does that help guide on responsible product development?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, and the name is the URL, yeah. To make it easier to find, you'll find pledges that can inspire tech workers to act and start conversations in their workplace about all these different areas of responsibility. We have resources on methodologies that can help you evolve your existing practice and tools that can help you act more responsibly every day. And the main tool we've developed so far is called PledgeWorks, which introduces pledge writing into existing processes as a way to seek better outcomes within a given context. And like all my other work with PledgeWorks, this tool is also not prescriptive, and pledges are intended to be adapted and modified to fit different contexts and processes. And as Matt was saying before, we are also using pledges in a lot of the work we do with Tethix. For instance, in the Ethos app, we'll be supporting pledge writing, because we really think that writing actionable commitments within a context and limited time frame is a great tool to help you think how you'll translate your good intentions into concrete action. So here, we're coming full circle to where we started this conversation, to the intent to action gap. As you can see, Matt, myself, and our diverse collaborators from around the world are really passionate about approaching this problem from different angles to support both organizations and individuals that really want to do good in the world. And it is our core belief that people want to do good. They just need the right environment, the right support, the right language, the right stories. So the intent to action gap is the problem worth solving for us. And it's how we really want to use our diverse expertise and knowledge to make a difference in the tech industry.
I love it. I think that's awesome. And I love the intent behind it. And I definitely am going to be paying attention to Tethix's development over the next several years. I'm really excited for what you're bringing to market and how that's going to help many teams and ultimately then the customers, right? The outcomes of these products is going to be better products and services for individuals. So that makes me excited. If listeners wanted to delve deeper into responsible firekeeping, this concept, and learn more, where should they go? What should they read? What do you recommend?
Yeah, we talk about a lot of things today. So if any of this resonated with you, we invite listeners to visit our website at tethix.co, where they can browse our workshop catalog to find workshops on responsible firekeeping and other topics, browse our other offerings. If they want to keep track of what we're developing and thinking about, they can subscribe to the Pathfinder's newsletter and our Substack publication. And we also hope they'll send us an email if they want to visit our virtual tea garden and have a chat about how we can help you transform the way you think, talk, feel, and do tech ethics.
I just want to be part of a virtual tea garden. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, you should visit.
I definitely will.
We have a blog post and video with a tour of that. It's how we do our meetings. We don't usually use Zoom because we also experiment with virtual spaces to help with learning and memory encoding and bring a bit of playfulness in a workspace. So all our meetings happen in our virtual tea garden.
Awesome. I love it. Do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience before we close today?
I guess, as Alja had mentioned, tech ethics, and it's intimidating. So the important part is just to start. We launched a series of challenges, as an example, on LinkedIn just recently called Tethix Pathfinding Seeds that challenge you to practice your elemental skills in small but accessible ways. So those tiny steps have compounding effects. So just getting started with these things is really important, rather than waiting for permission or waiting to have a clear view or formally your purpose, your values, your principles defined in detail. So just getting started, making time to slow down, sit down around the campfire or in your own tea garden, whether physical or virtual, tell stories, learn from each other. Most people care about this stuff. These are probably some of the most important questions, discussions for us to be having at this point in time, considering the impact that our technology has on the world around us and, our role as a species. So just start, have these conversations, learn, grow, and that'll compound over time.
Well, thank you so much, Matt and Alja. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us to talk about ethical firekeeping and responsible product development. Until next Tuesday, everyone, when we'll be back with engaging content and another great guest or guests. Thanks for joining us this week on Shifting Privacy Left. Make sure to visit our website, shiftingprivacyleft.com, where you can subscribe to updates so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found this episode valuable, go ahead and share it with a friend. And if you're an engineer who cares passionately about privacy, check out Privado, the developer-friendly privacy platform and sponsor of this show. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode. Bye for now.